Hey, my name's Patrick. I'm a student here at MSU. I just think it's pretty disgusting that you referred to AOC as the bartender, because that job is just as important as manipulating money on the stock market.
Is it factually inaccurate?
What?
Is it factually inaccurate that she was a bartender?
No, that's
Why is it
accurate.
disgusting?
What?
So why is it disgusting?
You can call the
I think
president a
it's-
billionaire real estate developer. I don't care.
I think it's demeaning to her by just calling her a bartender. You know?
It's demeaning to talk about someone's work history?
No, but the way you said it made it sound like that's
Okay, I used to bartend and waitress, so what's your question?
Okay. Never mind. But also I was wondering, Candace, why you didn't debate Kyle Kalinske from Secular Talk. What he says is that he was in coordination with the people at Politicon, and they actually said that you weren't ready for debates.
Okay, so this is one of the weirdest internet rumors I've ever heard about myself. I didn't attend Politicon. I didn't attend Politicon because I was in my sister's wedding. So I don't know why someone thought I was debating someone in California when I had a wedding in Connecticut, but I never, it's just an internet myth.
Will you do it next year?
I don't really, who's Kyle Kalinske?
Yeah, it's kind of like punching down for Candace, to be honest, so.
I'd like to debate AOC.
I respectfully disagree.
I'll take a Democrat candidate. we're not, I mean.
I talked to Kyle, and I talked to him on stage. We debated. It was fine. It was fun.
It's just kind of like
Candace says
trolling
Yeah.
a little bit. So there's.
Also, Mike Gravel, 2020.
Thank you for your question. Does anyone disagree in line? Anyone disagree? You come to the front, come behind the current questioner. Thank you. Okay, well then you definitely disagree with us, so you can come behind there. So, current question and then current question and then the disagreement. Thank you. Okay.
All right, for an actual question, with the rise of events in America where people are labeled guilty until proven innocent, for example, with the Kavanaugh case, how can we go back to a culture of following due process and innocent until proven guilty?
This one gets me really fired up because, listen, and this is why I say that I'm not a feminist. I think it's so important for women, level-headed women, to find their voices and to speak out against the radicalization of feminism, because what they're doing is trying to remove due process and saying you should just believe someone because they're a woman, because that's the most absurd thing I've ever heard. Do women never lie? Have we never told a lie? If there's a woman that disagrees, have we never disagreed with one another? We're obviously not in lockstep. So I actually think that, and I'm talking specifically in terms of radicalized feminism, which led to the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, I think it's going to take women finding the courage to stand up against these pussy hat wearing liberal women who are trying to create topics that make people feel really uncomfortable, right? Of course, every single person in this room would be supportive of a sexual assault victim or a rape victim, and we have tremendous sympathy for any woman that lives through that. And the left knows that, so they take something that is an uncomfortable topic to talk about, and they radicalize it, and they say, now you can't say anything, and everything that we say is true. It's going to take brave women to move the country back into the direction of due process and saying, regardless of an experience, we don't believe women, we don't believe men, we believe facts.
And have to point out the absurd double standard out there. Keith Ellison, the sitting attorney general in Minnesota, has serious allegations against him and documented 911 calls for sexual assault. The lieutenant governor of Virginia is still the lieutenant governor of Virginia, with 2 women on the record accusing him of sexual assault. And I have defended due process for the lieutenant governor, and I defended the due process for Keith Ellison. But how quickly and how quiet has Kamala Harris? She is now searching and seeking Keith Ellison's endorsement for her presidential campaign. Hold on, I thought you have to believe all women. Are you trying to call Keith Ellison's ex-girlfriend a liar, Kamala Harris? Because the left has no principles. They only want power. So they will cherry pick and choose certain issues and instances, like the Brett Kavanaugh hearing, to try to exploit that for their own personal gain.
Right, that's exactly right. And absent facts, that brought us Jussie Smollett, right? I mean, some talk about someone that should be in prison right now. And when you start...
Thank you for the question.
Thank you for the question.
We have to hold the mic.
Thanks for having me up here. I appreciate you letting me skip everyone. So my question to you is, we hear a big game from Turning Point USA and the right on how you want to reduce the size of government, when in fact, Government under conservative leadership here the past, 8, 10 years has not been reduced. And you still talk about increasing it. The wall, farm subsidies, I could go on. So my question to you is, what do you plan on doing to reduce the size of government? How do you plan on pressuring your elected officials to reduce the size of government when, in fact, they're not doing it? They're only increasing it.
Well, look, I mean, the Trump budget itself reduces government. It closes federal agencies and merges all of them. You know that there's been more federal workers that have left the federal bureaucracy than have been hired under the Trump presidency. Did you know that?
No, I did not.
So before you start
I'd like
to
to
say,
see some numbers, though.
okay, I just gave you a fact. So,
We don't really have a chart or access to.
Baseless.
okay.
Okay.
You're entitled to your own opinion. You're not entitled to your own facts, but that's okay.
Okay.
So under President Trump, every single budget he's submitted to Congress reduces the size of government. Under President Trump, for 16 months, do you know that he signed a federal hiring freeze? Did you know that? He signed a federal hiring freeze, which by definition shrinks government because over thousands of people every single week retire out of the federal bureaucracy. So under President Trump, the federal bureaucracy has gotten significantly smaller.
Well, you're trying to push forward a $13 billion wall. That's socialism at its finest. Farm subsidies.
What? A wall
Sorry,
is
what?
socialism? Do you know what
Farm
socialism is?
subsidies?
No, I believe in national security.
the farm-
I believe in
the
defending
farm
our borders.
subsidies
I do
that-
believe in a military.
What about the farm subsidies that Trump, the self-induced tariffs that,
Wait, no,
that are
can
now
you just,
requiring
can we just slow
bailouts?
down? Hold on, just slow down. Please explain to me how a wall is socialism, because that's the
Great.
craziest definition of socialism I've ever
It's
heard.
taxpayer funds going towards the good of society.
Is police socialism?
Absolutely. Police and fire protection, public schools,
So all government
public
is socialism?
lands, it's all types of
So you
socialism.
believe all government is socialism?
No, those are municipalities.
Any taxpayer subsidy that's put towards the common good of society in whatever context you think common good of society is a type of socialism. And everybody here uses those types of programs. You got public lands, public roads. I'm sure everybody in here likes to go shoot their guns on public lands. Well,
First of all,
government takes care
a
of
couple
that.
interesting facts, though, because a lot of public lands are actually paid for by hunting licenses. Therefore, the people that purchase the hunting licenses are the ones that are paying in. Secondly, the number one funder in the federal government that actually funds our transportation system is the federal gas tax. That's actually factored into your purchase of gasoline. So a lot of ways we have user taxes for the things that you're describing as socialism. So the more you drive, the more you pay into it. The more you hunt, the more you pay into it. Now, to your interesting convoluted point that every layer of government is socialism goes directly against the author of socialism's treatise. Socialism is the public ownership of such industries. So
exactly. And you know what? And
Okay.
those include worker co-ops, which I'm sure everybody here shops at the community co-op, right?
No.
No. Well, if you do, or let me say this: Town and Country. Who shops at Town and Country here? That is a worker co-op, and it's a type of socialism.
But it's all
So
voluntarily.
The hypocrisy here is
it's
pretty
really interesting.
overwhelming.
So let me tell you, what's amazing about a capitalist system is you can voluntarily be in a co-op. So no one's forcing Town and Country to be in a co-op. So only in capitalism could you voluntarily put yourself in that sort of system. But if you don't want to be in a co-op, you should have the freedom to do that as well.
What about the folks that are involved in capitalism that can't buy a home or that are being ripped off by the pharmaceutical companies and the healthcare industry? That's capitalism, all right, and people are losing. You got something to say to that?
Plenty.
Yeah, I know, actually a lot. Our
People are losing.
Okay, but
Do you think you're losing?
No, not necessarily.
Well, so then who are you to speak for other people if you're not losing and you're benefiting?
I'm not benefiting from the ACA whatsoever.
Well, the
it's,
ACA,
it's killing me.
the
Obamacare, the same thing.
That's socialism, bro.
No, it's not.
Give me a minute.
Actually, the ACA is a healthcare exchange where you can go on and buy insurance in the free market.
A government-created
It's a
website?
It's a website.
Created
it's a government
by what?
website
Who
where you can go buy different types of health insurance on the free market from private healthcare companies.
How many taxes were in Obamacare? 28 new taxes. You still can't buy health insurance across state lines. Hundreds and hundreds of pages of new regulation were part of Obamacare. It was 1,800 pages, and Nancy Pelosi said we have to pass it to find out what was in it.
Who's making the profits on healthcare right now? Is it the government or is it private industry?
Well, it's-
Private industry,
Yeah,
right?
sure. Correct, but not if you're a veteran. You go to the
That's
Veterans
not government
Administration.
regulated.
Well, if you go to the we have forms of socialized health care, and then the worst parts of our society and our culture.
Medicare, and it works.
Well, how about Medicaid? Medicaid doesn't work, and Medicare is deeply underfunded. Medicare has $60 billion of documented waste every single year, and Medicaid is healthcare for the poor. There's 62 million people on Medicaid in America right now, and the approval of people on Medicaid is sub 15%. Obamacare expanded Medicaid. It is a form of socialism. It doesn't work. This idea of Medicare for all is really Medicaid for all. It is not better health care for everyone. It's destroy our good health care system and give more free stuff to people for more votes, and then destroy the medical advancements that are inherent in our current system right now. Is our healthcare system broken? Absolutely. It's broken because government picks and chooses winners right now. And the ACA was nothing more than a pseudo-socialist bill that the insurance companies, the hospitals, and the drug companies lobbied for through the guise of trying to benefit people. But it was pseudo-socialism because it was government-created exchanges. 18,000 new IRS agents were hired under Obamacare, hundreds of pages of new regulation, 28 new taxes, including taxes under medical excise tax, the individual mandate tax, which literally forced people to buy health care if they didn't want it in our own generation. So, do you want to talk about how the wall's
again,
socialist,
real
or-
quick, so private industry's making the
like
profits, right?
Yeah.
Not the government. Just answer that
I think,
for me,
and
right?
I just think 10 questions is enough, and we have a whole line, but
Well, thank you for letting me come up here
Thank you. We
and
really
voice my
appreciate it.
opinion.
Thank you. And if anyone disagrees, feel free to move up. Thank you, or anyone in the crowd or whatever. So,
Hi, my name is Bo. I'm actually new to Montana, and
welcome.
I'm from South Carolina. This state's way better. Anyways, first of all, I just want to say thank you for speaking, specifically Ms. Owens there, as a woman speaking about positive masculinity. I know that that's proving that you're trying to work better for the next generation. So thank you very much. As a man, thank you very much for that. My question is, I wanted just your opinion on the tone of the next few years going into 2020, now that our president's been exonerated of everything. Do you think the left is going to get better or worse?
No. I mean, that's what I was paying attention to, the trends online today, just to see what direction they were going to go into. And it's just absolute lunacy. At a certain point, it is going to have to be diagnosed by a doctor. I am only kind of joking, right? Like, I mean, like if you're reading it, you thought it happened. It's like he said he didn't collude, and then you said, oh, we've got to wait for the Mueller report. The Mueller report comes out. Mueller comes out and says he didn't collude. Then you say, oh, we have to actually wait for the redacted document. The redacted document comes out, says he didn't collude, and now they're moving the ball again and saying that we need to bring in Mueller for a House Judiciary Committee, and they're going after Mueller. Like, until somebody creates a document that says Trump colluded, they're not going to be satisfied.
It's
There
a
is
mob.
zero
Go
literally, like, yeah, it's just they don't really care. And at the end of the day, this is what we're watching is like the sorest losers ever, right? The sorest losers ever.
They spent 2 years riling it up and nothing came from it. And, they
And
can't
this is
believe
why
it.
there shouldn't be participation trophies, right? So, and here's my theory on why it's happening. Here's what's happening. The left has been so crazy for so long. Like they've ended friendships, right, over Trump winning, right? They're done with you. They've called people racist. They've called them sexist. They've called them misogynist. They've hit the unfriend button on Facebook and said, I'm no longer speaking to this person because he's an avowed racist who doesn't see that there's collusion. Well, it's really hard to go the other way once you go that far left, right? It takes a tremendous amount of humility to be like, hey, I know I unfriended you and called you a racist bigot, but I was wrong. Saw the Mueller report, right? And that's what we're seeing is that they don't have the humility to look in the face and say that they're wrong. Now, in terms of people that should be held accountable, the media should be. I really do believe the media, the FBI, the division and the hate and the lunacy that they have sowed in this country is unprecedented. I honestly, we'll be talking about this for centuries and centuries, the Trump presidency. So unfortunately, to answer your question, my opinion is no. They're off the deep end now, but I do think that the more moderate Dems are coming over to our side, and I think that Trump 2020 will be a landslide.
Thank you.
thank you. Hello again.
Howdy, how's it going? Good to see you again, Charlie, Candace, and Kyle. I mean, I didn't see Candace and Kyle earlier, but I talked to Charlie, and they are phenomenal orators and very articulate, and it was a pleasure having you here at Montana State University. Thank you so much for coming here. Yes, clap. However, with that said, I asked actually Jeff Sessions the same exact question, and it was kind of a lackluster response, and what I mean by that is, well, I'll just ask you the question and see your response. And so, the question is, due to the partisan divide that has been growing in America, how do you believe that we can bridge this polarization? But sorry, can you hear me? Sorry, but on top of that, do you think the two-party system is adequately working to represent the Democratic Republic of America? So those are two very loaded questions. So
Let me take the first part of that question.
Yep.
So I figured this out is that I'm actually really good friends with a few kids from the March. And the kids from the March for Our Lives are really the ones who are pushing for gun control. But in just having respectful conversations, it sounds cliche, but just like respecting them as a normal human being and not just viewing them as a villain and vice versa simply because they hold different viewpoints, you're actually able to have those connections. And like maybe don't talk about politics 24/7. Maybe talk about other stuff. But it's actually treating the other individual as a human being. We see that with Dave Rubin. Dave Rubin, is a classical liberal, but we're able to be really good friends with him. We don't agree on politics. We may not agree on abortion. We don't agree on a bunch of stuff. But at the end of the day, if we view each other as just individuals and as good human beings and have these good conversations, we're actually able to forge those friendships.
And I would say that the burden is more on liberals, and what I mean by that is that there is no conservative Antifa, right? There's no conservative group that's trying to stop liberals from speaking on campus. It just doesn't happen. We don't protest. We think that if you have terrible ideas, we want to hand you a megaphone. I want AOC to say it loudly and proudly. Cows are farting, right? Because that if your idea isn't good, we can defeat it with our better ideas. We believe in debate. Like you see, you're welcome here. You're never going to have people shout you down. Unfortunately, we don't get the same treatment on the other side. We have to sneak in through kitchens and basements to get in because there's protesters and people that are threatening. We got bricks were threatened to be thrown at us at this event. So I would love to welcome a dialogue and to say hey, we just need to all get in the room and kumbaya. But unfortunately, I think that the burden is going to be more on you and your peers by saying, hey, I attended an event and they treated me like a normal person and you should come and maybe hear what they have to say.
And one of the greatest examples was your podcast. I think you had someone on from Black Lives Matter.
Right, yeah. I loved it. I loved because I actually think his ideas are so bad that I don't mind having a dialogue with him because I want to debate him and give him a bigger platform to show where we're locking horns. And the truth is, I like the guy. I think Hog Newsom, the leader of Black Lives Matter, is a nice guy. He's just wrong, and that it's okay to be wrong and we can be friends. And if you have the civility to sit down and speak with me, great.
Phenomenal, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. How many more dissenters are in the crowd?
Yeah, come to.
More?
Thank
Okay.
you. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Sorry.
you. We got a
Thank
dissenter. Yeah, thank you. We got a dissenting line.
Notepad.
Got a dissenter with a notepad.
And anyone in the audience,
Prepared.
if you're warming up, please come to the line.
First, I'd like to clarify that Kathy Griffin does not represent all ginger Americans. Point of fact. From my view, free speech in America exists due to a rebellion against Christianity rather than an adherence to it. How do you square the ideas of free speech and free thought against commandments in the Bible and other Judeo-Christian sources condemning free expression?
Can you name one verse in the Bible that would support that position?
Many of the Levitical codes, the Ten Commandments, there are several there.
Which one of the 10 Commandments suppresses dissenting opinion?
The commandments against coveting, that's convicting you of thought crime. You can't even think about desiring to have something. The adherence to the Sabbath, if we were to follow that, we would lose our Sunday papers, our Monday papers, and Ben Shapiro's Sunday special. And then honor thy father and mother, that is compelled speech, and in Deuteronomy 20:12, offered with reward. So there are multiple examples, mainly from the Old Testament, and also a few from the New Testament.
So I have to give you credit. I've never got this question before. But I'm going to tell you why you're wrong from a Christian perspective, because you specifically said Christianity. So in the Christian gospel, I'm an evangelical Christian. In the Christian tradition, we believe there's an old and new covenant. And Jesus, the Son of God, God in three parts, and we celebrate that this week, this Holy Week. Tomorrow we remember his death, and on Sunday the resurrection. He specifically wrote a new covenant for his people. Now, he did not say the old was wrong, but he said, instead of an eye for an eye, turn the other cheek, for example. Don't forgive a person once, don't forgive them 7 times, forgive them 77 times 7 times. He went so many steps further than that of, at the time, the current rabbinical tradition. Now, what was fundamental towards Jesus' teaching? Jesus, in my personal opinion, was one of the greatest documented free speech advocates in world history.
Yeah, and that was in challenge to the established religion. And then in later centuries, we see that, if you will, more Jesus-like people who were
Well, let's
anti-establishment.
talk about, you said Christianity. I want to focus on that.
Okay.
So he was challenging the current ruling class, which was the Pharisees that had a relationship with the ruling Roman Empire, right? So when he said, he essentially had sessions such as Matthew 5, which was the longest part of his entire gospel, essentially all of his teachings, Matthew 5 from the Beatitudes, where he allowed people to ask any question at any time. When someone threw an insult at him or someone threw something at him, he did not discount them, he embraced them. That's a unique and particular Christian teaching, is the embracing of other ideas and loving your enemies. He specifically says to love those enemies, not to shut them up, not to go after the Pharisees and tell them they can't be talking anymore. And to your Sabbath point, in the Christian gospel, Jesus picked grain on the Sabbath, so he did work on the Sabbath. And so I would challenge you to indict Christianity towards somehow being antithetical towards free speech, because in the 4 gospels we have of Jesus' life on earth, it was actually a defense and reinforcement of the values that built Western civilization. Loving your enemies, freedom of discussion, civil dialogue, voluntary exchange, caring for the poor, communities matter first, and the creation
Can
of
I
the church.
cite scripture maybe? Matthew 12:31, all manner of sin and blasphemy, which is the go-to throughout history of free speech, shall be forgiven unto men, but blasphemy against Holy Ghost shall not be forgiven unto men. So you can criticize other men and people, but you can't criticize God or the Holy Ghost.
Well, so now you're talking about spiritual ramifications. You're not talking about if you should shut somebody else if they're sinning. Jesus was talking about a very specific doctrine of Christian action, of what is the correct way to act.
And in the Old Testament, blasphemy was punishable by stoning and other forms of death.
Right, so again, to give an example, I'm going to reinforce this, and Kyle, if you want to give the Jewish defense of this, be my guest. But Jesus expounded, if not literally broke the curtain of the tabernacle upon his death, and to symbolize the destruction of the old covenant and the beginning of the new covenant. So a lot of the verses that people use to indict Christianity were never repeated, in fact, clarified, if not advanced, if not put in a whole different light under the teachings of Jesus Christ. And so to your part about Matthew 12, which I'm familiar with, Jesus is not saying if you have blasphemy, you shall be stoned. He never argued. Never once did Jesus call for the persecution, the killing, the targeting of any individual. This is important, because when Jesus came to Jerusalem on Palm Sunday and people were laying down palms, he could have took over the government of Jerusalem. He's one of the only figures in human history to resist government temptation. He could have been a ruler. In fact, he wanted nothing to do with government. He didn't want to shut people up. He wanted to embrace them. He was here for a much bigger purpose than being king of Jerusalem. He was the savior of the world. And so I'm very intrigued by your questioning, disagree with it, but find me another figure that allowed disagreement and dissent as much as Jesus Christ did. That's what built the ethos of discussion and debate and dialogue that we enjoy today, from Jesus literally allowing forums of hundreds, if not thousands, of people to come and ask him anything.
Do I have a follow-up?
I will say, I think that was actually one of the most interesting questions that we ever received, so thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Hi.
Hello. So I'm occasionally pop my head into the political atmosphere, see what it's like. This has been a very educational experience for me, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I had a big question for Candace, and forgive me if I'm a little behind if there's been a big change for it, but there's a huge movement for implicit bias to be taught for cops to help change or revolutionize and ensure a stop to police brutality in a lot of communities, specifically that are a high percentage of blacks. And I was wondering if that is a positive change that you can see in the police force, or if we should move to something more, or we shouldn't, or we don't need to act at all with the police or with the police system right now.
That's a good question. I obviously, I'm anti-Black Lives Matter because I think the entire thing was built on what was fundamentally a myth, which is the idea that Black Americans were being targeted by police officers when we know, in fact, that by rate, white men are killed more often unarmed by police officers and Hispanic people are killed more often by police officers. But here's the important part. Police officers are 18 and a half times more likely to be shot unarmed, to be shot by a black man than the other way around. So some of the things that we're talking about when you say that police officers go into a certain neighborhood and they're more fearful, it could be because black people are committing more crimes, right? And if your life is contingent upon you understanding the statistics of what your chances are going into certain neighborhoods versus other neighborhoods, they could be, you know, a little bit more on edge. But again, we're talking about something that shouldn't even be a discussion. You have a higher chance as a black American of being struck by lightning than you do by being shot unarmed by a police officer. So I think the entire thing was born out of a movement that was built on fluff, and it needs to just die. And we need to be embracing police officers, because I'll tell you what, they are the ones running into black neighborhoods saving black men.
So then, just as a super quick follow-up,
Yeah.
would the do you think there's a psychological impact for the statistics being listed to officers, telling them they're 18 times more likely to be shot in a black community than in a white community? And do you think that would have a toll on how they create a bias subconsciously towards people that might approach them that look different?
You know, that would be a better question for a police officer, right? I mean, I definitely can't answer that. All I know is that I think that the dialogue has it's been extremely unhealthy, and it hasn't been beneficial. And since the spawn of the Black Lives Matter movement, it's actually made it more complicated for police officers to do their job. And lastly, I'll note this, nobody knows this, but there are black police officers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sheriff's Department just hit me up.
In the time we have remaining, we want to give the beacon call for disagreement. If you go ahead. You can come forward, please, if you disagree. Again, we love our agreements, we really do, but we want the clash of ideas. The current question can ask, though, because the current question can ask with your no. The current question can ask, and then we'll go to you. Thank you.
Hi, and I'm going to try to take up not too much of your time, but I would first like to say thank you to all of you to coming out. I'm not familiar with you, Kyle, and
No worries.
Charlie.
Not her.
Candace,
It's
I'm
okay.
most
I have
familiar
to
with
look
you.
up there for my name, too, sometimes. So.
Who are these people?
I'm most familiar with you, Candace, and there's some of the stuff I've seen of you online that's very striking that I actually use in deliberation with various liberal parties as well. I'm a little bit behind on stuff because I've been keeping up on my personal life and trying to keep things settled, but I'm very libertarian. I'm neither pro-left or pro-right. And unfortunately, a lot of what we see out of both the left and the right, and a little bit of what I've seen tonight, has been propaganda as well. It's an unfortunate truth of how politics is settled. And because there's a lot of propaganda and that, leaves a lot of truth behind, what I would like to ask it from you guys is, I know, Candace, you touched on some of this. You do your podcast, which is great. I was wondering, besides stuff like this, how do you guys tend to go out and engage the left and, try to create dialogue between the left and the right? Because as a libertarian who has friends on both the left and the right, I think that is the single most important way forward for all of us to see a better America. I'm sure there are lots of points I agree with you on as well. So that's what I was wondering, is how do you engage that most?
Right. So I think first and foremost, I don't think anything we said tonight was propaganda. I don't think loving your country is propaganda, but okay, we'll put that in a separate box.
Fair enough.
In terms of engaging, we said if you have a disagreement, come to the front of the line. We literally invite other groups. We want Democrat groups to come to, demand them to come to these places. Whether they come or not is up to them. The purpose of me doing my podcast was to hit the internet and have longer discussions with people on the left and having full conversations. We don't ever exclude anyone. We never say that it's not open for people that are, whether they're libertarian, conservative, liberal. We want everybody to come because, as I said, we want the best idea to win. We are not often embraced on the other side. So there's not much else we can do other than to invite people, to encourage people, to give them applauses, to tell them to come to the front of a line, and to create a place for them to actually hear our ideas in a longer format, as I am doing with my show. If you have any other suggestions, we'd be open to hearing them, I'm sure. But I think that we are the most welcoming, opening people in the entire world. And I've definitely made a huge effort this year to connect with Black Lives Matter and to tell them that if they rebrand themselves and they stop going after police officers and maybe attack the abortion industry, I'll put on a Black Lives Matter t-shirt tomorrow.
And I would just like to say that I agree with you on that point entirely. The number of times I've had someone on the left scream at me for my left or my right-leaning beliefs versus the number of times I've had someone on the right scream at me, I can't really think of a time I've had many people on the right scream at me. You guys are incredibly open, and that was just one of the things I want to toss out there. I personally did not even know that you did a podcast, Candace, until it was mentioned in a previous question. So that was why I wanted to voice the question, to make sure that there are people who know that you guys are trying to engage all sides so that people know that that is the way forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello.
Thank you. I am a graduate of Montana State University, and I think this is a great organization. I have acquired a number of patents on a product that I created, and so I believe there is an amazing opportunity in this country as well, and I was a successful entrepreneur. However, I am concerned about the rich-poor gap that's happening. It's also shown in Harvard Business Review. It's a fact that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Or there's a bigger gap there that should be. It's getting larger. What is the Republican Party doing to address that gap, and also the tax code, which has gotten so complicated the average person can't understand it, and also the whole Medicare program? I've got a guy who's a PhD in psychology, and he says he can't figure out where his bills are coming from and who's paying him. He just writes them a check however it works out. So these are the issues that I think you really need to start addressing, and I haven't heard anything about that. I'd like to hear something on that.
Sure. It's okay if you don't know, but do you know where the wealthiest counties in America are by any chance? The wealthiest counties in America are?
That's irrelevant. We want to know what's the difference between the haves and the have-nots.
It's actually very
Actually
relevant.
really relevant. So let me tell you why. The wealthiest counties in America, 8 out of 10 of the wealthiest counties in America are around Washington, D.C. And they used to be around cities like Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, cities that made stuff that were centered on manufacturing and entrepreneurialism. But why all of a sudden are the wealthiest counties around D.C.? What does D.C. make? They make laws and regulation, and they reward insider crony deals for the lobbyists that have proximity to certain lawmakers. How did we get to be from a country that used to reward hard work and ingenuity and made stuff and entrepreneurialism away from that? Well, the answer is very simple. As government grows, those that are close to government will get rich with it. The wealth gap is most exacerbated. The greatest wealth inequality is around Washington, D.C., is around the people that are living in the ruling class, the people that are lobbyists and trial lawyers and that work for the companies that benefit from defense contracts in Fairfax County and beyond. And then the middle America, the part of the country that was disenfranchised greatly by both political parties over the last 30, 40 years that rose up to elect Donald Trump. So our position on it is the further we got away from the free market and that we started to reward crony insider deals, which is not capitalistic at all, it's cronyism. It's not capitalistic. There's nothing capitalistic about Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank did nothing but empowered the very big banks that Chris Dodd and Barty Frank thought they were going to go after, even though more community banks have closed since the passage of that bill than ever before, and the big banks are only expanding their portfolios and expanding their earnings and expanding their profits. So our solution, first and foremost, is the bedrock of America, which is entrepreneurs. And just because we didn't mention it doesn't mean we haven't mentioned it before. It's not exhaustive, but our position is quite simple, that the greatest way to solve a problem is to increase freedom and liberty for individuals in any certain capacity and not reward people that are closest to D.C. the merits of the fruits of that labor. And never before in our country's history have we seen such a digression towards D.C., where they don't make anything of value. No one in this room consumes a product every single day that comes out of Washington, D.C. If you do, I'd be amazed and I'd love to hear about it, unless it's a rule, a law, or a regulation making your life harder. If you're a farmer or a rancher, I guarantee you deal with the Employment Prevention Agency. I mean the Environmental Protection Agency. If you're, everyone in this room deals with somebody from D.C. somewhere in your life, in some capacity, and they're the ones that have the $130,000 a year jobs and the pensions, and they're impossible to fire, and there's something unequal about that. So.
But why has this gone away? Why is the gap getting bigger in the last 20, 30 years, 40 years? What is in the tax code? I believe it's in the tax code that's making that happen. I don't believe the rich are taxed equally according to what the rest of us are taxed.
No, you're right. They actually pay more. They've actually paying more taxes. The rich pay 67% of all the federal income tax. The top 5%.
I agree that they pay a lot in taxes.
They pay too much.
But they don't pay a percentage the same as the rest of us do. I'm talking about percentages.
No, I know. So 67% of all federal income tax is paid by 5% of Americans. So
and that's a crime.
You're right. It should be a lot lower than that.
It should be 67%
of all taxes
shouldn't pay all the taxes.
You're not listening to what I'm saying. 5% of the American people account for 67% of all the taxes.
And that's a shame because they own all the wealth. Therefore, they have to pay that much in taxes. That wealth should be more distributed so that all of us are paying into this because it disenfranchises.
No, that's theft. That's theft. That's not how America works. No.
When Mitt Romney said that he only paid $15 million on his $40 million income, that tells me that he's paying a lot less percentage taxes than I have paid.
I actually don't know Mitt Romney's tax situation, so I can't really speak to that.
It was public knowledge.
Okay,
when he ran
can't
for
really.
president.
I'd have to know more about that situation, but the idea that because somebody finds success, they should somehow be paying more or be paying taxes for everyone is literally the definition of theft.
I just want the same percentage.
So, no, so I think we should have a 10% flat income tax in America, no deductions, no exemptions, same for everybody.
Thank you. You've been a great.
Thank you.
You've been great, great orators. I appreciate it.
God bless you.
Thank you so much.
Hey, how's it going,
What's up?
guys? Thank you so
Hey.
much for coming out. I love you all.
Thank
but
you.
Changed my mind. I'm going to steal Steven Crowder, little copyright infringement. I believe that the legalization of marijuana and possibly even the legalization of psychedelic drugs. I know you were on Joe Rogan, Candace. He's a great guy, right? So what are your thoughts on the legalization of marijuana and then a little follow-up, something like psychedelic drugs like DMT or mushrooms?
What am I changing your mind on?
Well,
That was
what's your
just the
stance?
question.
Let's start here. What's your stance on legalization of marijuana?
I believe
Here's
in
what I'll say.
decriminalization.
Decriminalizing it because it's something like prohibition, where it's just like, look, I personally don't smoke marijuana. I don't find it to be. I don't do drugs. I just did a whole year and a half of not drinking alcohol. I don't think it's productive. That said, I don't think that the government telling people that they can't do something stops it. Almost every single person that I went to college with smoked marijuana. So you can almost liken it to the prohibition era, where it doesn't matter how much you say don't do something. It doesn't mean that people aren't going to do it. I believe in decriminalizing it. I definitely think that it should be decriminalized. And in terms of psychedelics, that's
Well, look, we get this question so much, and look,
I do not think psychedelics should be legalized.
Yeah. By the way, the psychedelic thing, interesting. I didn't know there was
Yeah.
a market, but it kind of goes to show. I mean, try to be productive with a psychedelic drug. I mean, yes.
It's
geez.
scary if you're seeing stuff and you hear about these crazy, insane murders of people that are like on bath salts, like gnawing off someone's face.
No, not like bath salts.
But like, where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line? You're
shroom?
obviously seeing something that makes you want to gnaw someone's face off.
Is it somewhere between shrooms and acid, or
Like, where do you draw the line?
Naturally derived substances.
No, I'm
Okay.
not for the legalization
And again,
of psychedelics.
I know this is iffy. I'm not totally sure on
Yeah.
where you draw
Being
the
able
line.
to see stuff, like if you think a giraffe is up here right now, and then like you're gonna like hunt it. I'm not for legalization of something that completely transforms what you can see.
I mean, I will say this, and Candace and I, we're for decriminalization. We love freedom, but just the overemphasis on this stupid weed debate just really ticks me off, honestly. Just because, like, do your life, that's fine, but don't glorify it. Don't act like your life is going to get better because you do weed. Don't tell me that all of a
Can you
sudden
tell that Charlie doesn't do drugs? Do weed.
I mean,
Do weed.
I've never done weed in my life. I don't plan to. No, but seriously, if you want the freedom to do it, like, fine, but like, is it the overemphasis and just the movement for it? It's so evangelistic. Go smoke. Don't tell other people to go do it.
Yeah, I'm not saying.
I'm not saying you, but it's just we get this question all the time where I'm afraid that the freedom will then come with the glorification of the lifestyle. And I know some bums that smoke weed and their lives are screwed up because of it.
Right.
And that's fine. They should have the freedom to screw up their life. I shouldn't pay for their government benefits, though. Are you kidding me? Make them take a drug test. And so, yeah, I mean, we're freedom people. Like, if you want to make a decision that's not beneficial to yourself, but you're not going to hear me say a good thing about weed. You're just not. I mean, I think in some cases, medically, it could be better than the ridiculous pharmaceutical companies. I do think there's a case for that. But recreationally and turning it into a whole lifestyle, I don't think you're going to become a more ambitious, better person over 10 years. And I'm sure there's there's outliers to that. I'm positive there are, so I'm not trying to make too broad of a stroke. But I'm just fascinated by this is the number one question that we get. So.
Well, we are on college campuses,
Yeah.
Charlie.
Thank you. So.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Well, I'm kind of going to piggyback off of what he said, but this is going to be a more in-depth question. How do you guys feel about consensual crimes in terms of prostitution, gambling, and other all hard drugs being legalized?
So prostitution is a gateway for child sex trafficking. Make no mistake. That sex trafficking is one of the main feeders of sex trafficking is prostitution. Now, the prostitution industry is fed off of a broken culture. I totally understand that. But I'm just totally against legalized prostitution. I've never seen where that has been decriminalized. The culture actually gets better. In Vegas, for example, you have an entire industry of people that fly in from around the world, and it's really, really horrible things happen. And so, personally, I'm very committed to ending sex trafficking in this country. I think it's one of our great sins. And anything that feeds off of that in any way, capacity, I would want to end. So, gambling, which I'm pretty... And gambling with the right licenses, I'm fine with. I mean, gambling, I'm very open for.
Well, it's said that the oldest profession is prostitution.
Stonemason, not prostitution.
Okay, second oldest. In a well-regulated market, wouldn't you agree that there would be a decrease in child trafficking?
No, because it hasn't proven to be true. Las Vegas is the second biggest of child sex trafficking, and they have decriminalized prostitution. It's not legal, but it's basically legal. Police barely enforce it. And there are sectors in Nevada where they do have legalized prostitution.
Okay. What about the other, like all drugs being legalized?
No.
No.
Why not?
Because if you thought I was a giraffe on stage and you tried to hunt me, I'd be I'm not for, like, it's just weird, like, to say, like, all drugs. I'm talking about bath salts. Someone just ate someone's face. Like, are you guys, like, there's stories of people that are eating people's faces. Why would you legalize bath salts?
In San Francisco's decriminalizing heroin. They have injection points. They have more syringes on the street than I've ever seen before. You just can't make an argument that, wow, that's a country I want to live in.
Right.
You know? Yeah, I want my son to be able to see a guy injecting outside of my church.
A&E? What was that show on A&E?
Chris Angel,
Intervention. Yeah, watch like one season of that, and you will be against legalizing all drugs.
Bath salts were actually legal in the terms of when the attacks happened, but the reason that they were used was because that more widely used drugs were illegal at the time. So you have these increases of research chemicals being used instead of real drugs, and that's what we're seeing is these crazy like homemade drugs being used instead of these proven to work drugs, if you will.
What does bath salts work for?
Well, no, it was the research chemical created as a way to get high legally at the time.
Yeah, nope, that's a no from me.
And look, I will say this, the myth that somehow decriminalizing opioids is going to lead to solve the opioid crisis is absolute BS. That somehow that if we make all these drugs legal, that's going to solve the opioid crisis in this country. The opioid crisis is breaking the back of middle America. The meth, the drugs that are coming across the southern border, there are other reasons that it is happening. It's illegal right now, and people can get access to it. If they have more access to it in supermarkets where you could actually overdose and in months be a totally different person, I don't see any evidence whatsoever how that's going to make us a stronger and more prosperous culture or country whatsoever.
Right, and I think that's demonstrated by the pharmaceutical industry. A lot of these people are getting addicted in the first place because they're getting legal doses of heroin from their doctors, and then they once they're done with their prescription, they turn to the streets. So it's.
Well, it was the overprescription that caused it, but now you have people who are addicted after being kicked out of their prescription. So now you have
That's
people
what I just said.
Yeah, well, right. I'm agreeing with you.
I literally just said that.
Yeah, but now you have people going into.
Did you
No,
listen to what she said?
I agree. What I'm
No, I'm
saying
just kidding
is
with
that
you.
you have people now going to heroin on the street instead of getting these legal, regulated substances and getting killed by fentanyl.
They still
and all this.
overdose, though. The people that overdose on pills are found in the middle of the night because they overdosed on pills.
But now you have people taking heroin dying.
They just
in the
take
street.
more of it.
Yeah,
They just take more of it. When they have the
pills.
pills, they just take more of it. If they can't get the pills, they turn to the street.
So
They're
how
dying
about
either
this?
way.
Here's like a brilliant idea. Instead of giving them injection sites, how about a drug detox program for them? I mean, it's like you do realize there are other alternatives than keeping them on a chemically
high.
addictive methadone, right? That you could actually, there's drug purification centers. There are the equivalent of AA for opioids that does amazing work in our country. And so somehow that we need to, and there is some scientific research, you can wean them off of that in a medical environment, by the way, and those are controlled areas that are usually in remote, they're sanctioned by the Health and Human Services and by the California Department of Health or whatever state that you're in, where you can wean somebody off of methamphetamines over 60 days or 90 days, not for the sake of addicting them or keeping them on there, but for actually getting them to a path of purity. What San Francisco is doing is having these injection sites that now they have lines around the door. Have you been to San Francisco lately?
You can't walk around there anymore. There are needles straight up on the floor everywhere.
Oh my goodness.
These needle exchange sites have ruined Seattle. They have ruined San Francisco. They have ruined LA. You can't walk anywhere. You can't go to a playground without there being needles on the ground and people who are homeless
Morgan,
shooting
we'll
into
do
their
that.
veins.
So thank you for your question. We'll get one more question. One more. It's fine. We got it. Thank you. Sorry, it's the last.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello. Today I'm wearing the French garb due to the loss of Notre Dame in mourning.
He said he's wearing a
I'm
French
wearing-
garb
wearing
due to the
Fren-
loss of Notre Dame.
Yeah, in mourning. My concern of socialism is worse in Europe, though, because it has. I am American, but I do connect myself with Europe due to my family, and it is much worse there. And my main question would be, I have two questions. How do I survive in a university in being some of the unlikely conservative students to go here, which is not many, and since socialism is worse in Europe, do we have a responsibility to smash it there too?
Sure. I mean, what we're seeing right now in Europe is socialism is just piggybacking off the back of capitalism. That's really, it's running off the fumes on capitalism. People can say socialism is doing fantastic in Europe. It's really doing terribly. The reason why these countries are still running is because they have so much freedom. We see this in Switzerland. What we can focus right now in America, like what we can actually do, is target the politicians that are pushing for crazy policies and push back against them. What we see with AOC, the crazy Green New Deal, $93 trillion wasted. Can't have planes, we can't have cows. But it's actually showing the facts and looking. Okay, sadly, I had to read all of AOC's Green New Deal. I regret reading all of it. I lost some brain cells, quite a bit of brain cells. But it's actually pushing back with facts against them. And like, if we present these arguments, we're going to win because we have all the facts. We don't need the feelings. And what we're seeing right now is that these European countries are slowly going to collapse because of socialism. And we can see the trend that's going on there, and we can try to prevent it here. But sadly, we are seeing the rise. I mean, like every single Democratic candidate for president, I think most of them supported the Green New Deal. And they refused to back down on it. And we're seeing the left going further to the left. And really, they've kind of ostracized a main part of their base who they don't want. They don't want socialism. So there's that. So, Candace?
You are marrying somebody from Britain.
Yeah, I am.
Congratulations
Thank
to
you.
Candace, by the
She's
way.
getting married, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, look, everyone knows what's going on in Europe. It's a complete disaster. They've got so many things going on. On top of that, the migrant crisis and having to take care of a bunch of people that are flooding into their borders. And this is why they're sort of looking to America as the last stand for Western civilization. So we have to be that. And I can check the temperature all the time in the UK. I spend quite a lot of time there since I am marrying a Brit pro-Brexit.
Sorry, the migrant crisis is most likely the reason why the arson happened, which I believe it's an arson. I don't think that was an accident. To be honest.
Well, look, the facts will definitely tell that. Yeah, and I mean, I've seen that people that think that we're going to wait for the facts and see what happens, but not enough people are talking about the migrant crisis and what's going on in Europe. But yeah, I mean, I'd look to, I guess in closing, to say this is why we fight for what we fight for every day. We don't want America to become what Europe has become. We truly believe that we believe in economic prosperity, which comes from free markets and capitalism, and protecting that against globalists and people that are pushing for socialism. People are not fleeing America to go to Venezuela, that's for sure. And there's a reason for that. We really do believe that America is the greatest country in the world. Charlie, if you want to add anything here in closing.
Well, I just want to thank Congressman Gianforte and Senator Daines for fighting for everything that we talk about in D.C. every day. And this is a phenomenal state. It's one of the great treats we get every year to come out to this state, and we want to come back. But make no mistake, the left that you see on television is growing here in this very state. People from successful states